Hello there. Glad to see you all. Thanks for joining us. If you're just joining us now, please just make sure you're taking your seats. I'm watching you in the back row. That's it. Sit down, turn your phone off. This is the best panel of the day. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nick Collier. I'm the director of High-Vis Media Group, and you join us for this incredible panel entitled Broadcast Wars, the Esports Production Landscape 2021. Quite an aggressive tone and use of language there, broadcast wars, but to give you some insight, in late 2020, it's been reported that there were discussions afoot for the exclusive English language media rights to the League of Legends esports. This isn't that surprising, and we can perhaps expect to see more exclusive media rights deals linked across the ecosystem in the near future, with the likes of Twitch and YouTube still vying with one another alongside the more traditional broadcasters now in contention. Additionally, innovations in broadcast of esports continue, particularly as teams adjust to the new workflow demands and opportunities offered by the entire online product. What is the latest in 2021? And how will we see this sector of the industry develop through this year? Moreover, too, exactly what kind of esports content are the traditional broadcasters most interested in? And what are the current challenges? Well, joining me to answer those questions, I have an incredible panel. Joined again, pleasure to see you again, Nicholas Eastrup, the VP of Product at Blast. Nigel Crowe, he is the sports right executive for BBC Sport. He's joining us. He's become a picture, unfortunately. His internet appears to be having a few issues, but he is there, I assure you. And we also have Ryan Thompson, the CPO and co-founder of Esports Engine. Thank you all for joining us. Just some housekeeping, as I say, turn your phones off. You don't want to miss a second of this conversation. But if you have any questions you want me to personally deliver with a kiss and a smile at the same time to any of the panelists, please don't forget to use Slido, the hashtag ESI Digital for the number, not spelling FOUR. So anyway, enough about me and me whittling away here. Let's just whip around the panel and get some introductions. You know their names now, but let's hear a bit more about what they do. Nicholas, thanks for joining us. Welcome again. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Thanks for having me. And great panel. Excited to be next to these talented gentlemen. I sit as VP of Product at Blast, and that's holistically overseeing everything that we do. So that can be everything from big arena events to other types of activities, and try to make sure that all touch points within our company from a product point of view is as good as possible. So working in this regard as well with different broadcasters to make sure that what they receive is everything they need in order to be happy. And I'm sure we'll dive into much more about that later.
And so to answer the other side of said question there, we have the broadcaster. Auntie herself has joined us. Nigel, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about your role within this ecosystem and what you've been up to recently.
Hi, Nick. Hello, everyone, and sorry for the internet troubles. I acquire and evaluate esports for BBC Sport, and I also do some other sports, including basketball. And one of the things that we're doing is just constantly looking at the esports landscape and trying to see which ones fit best for us and our broadcasting requirements. So it's ongoing and very varied at the moment.
Indeed it is. And Ryan, to face some of those challenges from a production landscape, I guess that's where you and me, our two minds meld quite often. But tell us a little bit about what it's like on your side of the pond and where you find yourself in this wide picture at the moment.
Yeah, we've seen it big and small. I've spent the better part of the last 2 decades in esports. Started with Major League Gaming back in 2004. So started in convention centers and ballrooms and brought that all the way to stadiums in the past few years. So we were acquired by Activision in 2016, spent another 3 years there. Esports big and small again, but we departed and formed Esports Engine in 2019. So we handle production, competition operations, broadcast, ecosystem design. So every part of esports, I've seen it when it first started back in the day, and where it's come since then.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Ryan. So let's just kick off with some leading questions that I'm going to throw at all of you, and I think that's is a good way of establishing the wider conversation we're about to have. So I'm going to throw one straight at Nigel. I think it's rather prudent. Can you just tell us, are broadcasters looking to take rights for esports? Just is it a COVID fad? Tell us a little bit about why now, and what's piqued the interest of you.
I think COVID has to be an element in it, and it made things a lot more stark in terms of what is available. And it really showed the advantages of esports being out there, being online, being swift to adapt, and being able to work without audiences. But I think the really big thing that has affected broadcasters and me personally is the stat, okay, that gaming is bigger than music and video combined. And I think that's been the case for 2 years, but this year there was a whole flurry of articles. And I think that's what's really shone a spotlight on gaming and esports in particular.
Yeah, it's incredible that actually when you start making those comparisons, because you go back a couple of years ago and those comparisons would never have been drawn, and the facts were probably still the same then as they are now. But Nicholas, from the other side of the coin, what's it like to be wooed by the BBC and broadcast in general? And tell us a little bit, what are the commercial considerations are you having to make before you sign away the crown jewels of your product to broadcasters?
It's probably a lot of wooing going the other direction, I think, much more so, because I think esports is obviously a tricky proposition, and I think it's incredible to have people like Nigel and companies like the BBC and others who are willing to take that risk and truly believe that if you get into your fold what the youth is watching, then they'll most likely tune in. And I think that is something that's been a big part of our entire broadcast strategy from day one. And I think Denmark being a really good example where we started. The first ever event we did was broadcasted on national TV here, and I think that helped that kind of landslide mentality that shifted in our very, very small country compared to everyone else in the world, basically. But still, it kind of helped take esports from what Ryan was also talking about, which is my background too, those gymnasium halls of events living there, to now becoming something that is covered just like sports is, right? So I think where some may think old world in regards to broadcasters, we see them as an incredibly important piece in legitimizing esports on a whole nother level. So I think disregarding them would be foolish. To us, they're extremely important.
There's some really critical words you've said in your opener for 10 there. The keyword legitimizing is one I'll pick on, and we'll pick apart of those later on as we explore this conversation further. Ryan, what type of production do you think suits broadcasters? I remember somebody using the expression, there's publisher-led tournaments, and then there's the Wild West. It may have been you who told me that. It has to be said, Ryan. Sorry, I'm not going to steal completely your thunder. I just loved it so much, I was going for it. Tell me a little bit about what the tournaments that are best suited for broadcasters could be.
Yeah, and I think it can be, kind of the greatest strength and greatest weakness of esports is there's lots of options, right? Esports is global. It's very diverse in its offering and its viewer base. There's lots of games, lots of different types of viewers, lots of different formats. So yeah, it can be seen as the Wild West with all of those options. But that means that there's a lot to work with. So the answer is going to be what works best for the region and for the platform and for the partner. It's never just a hand over the keys to the show we've been doing all along and just put it on television. For example, if the goal is to have a new product for new viewers on linear, you need to pick the right game. Maybe you pick something that's not as complicated as some of the stuff that we tend to put on air. Or you can tweak that experience for linear. It's not just pointing the transmission to a different place for exclusivity rights. That's not going to fly. Maybe you produce a different stream, or one strategy that we've found a lot of success with is an abridged portion of the event. Esports are long and grueling, and there's lots of viewers that watch for lots of hours. That's not going to fly on TV, but it all culminates, right? So if you point your prime time at the last few hours, maybe the last match of the broadcast, that's a great compromise to both get all of your online viewership and then either have some form of exclusivity or something that will work for a linear audience. And I think the hardcore people will understand that, and you don't have to dumb it down, but adding additional production because of television will go over a lot better than changing your production because of television.
I totally agree. Let's open this discussion up a little bit and see where it takes us. Naturally, I'm inclined to start at the top. This subject really is, it's broadcast wars, so no better way to lead in with a conversation by using our best asset here, Nigel. Nigel, I'd just like to discover with you really as a start here, and Nicholas and Ryan, feel free to chip in as well as Nigel starts. But Nigel, if you wouldn't mind, just explain a little bit about the barriers you've encountered, because presumably there are bigger considerations than this just being the right time for it. I mean, there's a wider ecosystem here you're having to adopt. Tell us a little bit about what you've experienced and the things that have taken you along this journey.
I think that there's been many things that we've learnt dealing with all the different esports we've been dealing with, but the one that's really struck me is the ratings issue with the PEGI ratings, and that affects CSGO and Call of Duty, and will affect Valorant as well. So that's something, and that has affected the way that we could promote our coverage of the Blast Premier series. So that was very surprising for us, and it was something that we really had to work hard to work around. The other thing that we found really interesting was just the sheer amount of content that is created in all of the esports, and in some ways that is a blessing, but for us trying to get it onto linear channels, it's just very, very difficult. And the understandable lack of certainty of when a series will end or when a match will end. So things like that are, we were aware of them, but we weren't quite aware just how long they might be or how in depth they might be. So it's been a real learning experience for us, but it's been fun.
I guess, Nicholas, actually, it's a really good question from the other side of that. You know, we've all gone to an event expecting it to be a 10-hour tournament, and then 18 and a half hours later, we're still sat in the auditorium wondering what's going on. How do we counter that?
Well, I think there's some things that we can tweak that also doesn't necessarily scare away that very core and passionate group of people that also tune in, right? And a lot of that comes from setting match times in stone, right? And making sure that happens at a given time. It was something that in the early days of esports wasn't as much of a thing, and have become it more and more. And I think the growing increased interest from broadcasters is kind of helping push that as well, because, you know, the Champions League final, you know, everyone wants that to start at a certain time, right? You can't expect that to be an hour early and definitely not an hour late either. And I think just simple things like that are tweaks that we can help implement. And it is a hard juggle, because it's that, to us at least, also very much the balance of keeping it competitively sound, if we can call it that, so that the players are happy, the fans, the inner core of the fan group is happy, and then at the same time making it something that's somewhat consumable, right? I think at Blast we tried to play around with tons of ways to try to solve for this. In the early days, we did 3 matches at once. All of a sudden, we managed to boil down a week-long event to a day and a half, which is, when you think about it, slight lunacy, but from a production point of view, managing all of that triple broadcasting at once. But that was one take as to how we could do it, right? And I think it'll be a ton of tweaking and trying out ways of making it easier to digest. But I think in its core principle, it is also just the way esports kind of works, right? So that comes down to how a game is played and how a necessary tournament structure is built out as well.
I think so much of it comes down to that competitive structure, right? Most events, we're running through a season in a week or a weekend. You know, I don't think people really realize that. When esports is very good about finding the best team, right? We're almost always in some sort of double elimination plus round robin plus we play a lot. The more you play, the more likely you are to find the best team, and that's great. But that's not great for entertainment. So I think what I was saying kind of before is peeling off the kind of the prime time parts is a great target. The idea that you need to broadcast the whole thing maybe is a bit much to chew for a network. Maybe they don't want 500 hours of content, but it does all come down to one final match, and one match is manageable. But when you're trying to run through a season in a week, of course you're going to be on air all day.
Yeah, and another thing that we noticed was all the integrity checks that are being done, and the ping, and issues with teams in different continents and different countries. All of those things really add up and take up time and take up resources. And so it's understandable that there are issues, which maybe will be resolved a lot better once everyone's in arenas again.
Definitely.
I think it's a really good point, because at the end of the day, you don't get a football match being played by 11 players dotted around and playing from their homes. Again, it goes back to that what you said at the start, Nigel, which is the fact that this content has been available throughout this period of time. I think it's quite interesting. Ryan, you kind of touched on it, and Nigel, I know this would be quite close to home for you, but talk about the audience demographics that this content appeals to, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're not talking about winning over the viewers who would watch esports traditionally on Twitch or YouTube or Facebook, are we? We're looking at a new audience, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, all broadcasters are very much interested in the whole 16 to 34 demographic. And in fact, the Director General of the BBC has gone on record repeatedly stating that's what he wants to acquire and also to keep. But I think with the esports, the thing that the traditional broadcasters can offer is a place for that audience to watch with family members, with friends, and to show their other parts of their family or their social. This is what I'm into. This is what I like. Have a look at it, and hopefully we can legitimize it a little bit, as was said earlier.
No, I agree, Ryan. I think I guess throw it to you. Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think I've totally experienced that myself. For the better part of my career, I've tried my best to explain to my parents what I did, and it never clicked with them until they actually came to an event and sat with me. We looked at the screen, we experienced all the people around us. It was very much a social experience to get that new viewer, which was mom and dad, which I don't think I would have ever got mom and dad to even know what I did, let alone like it, if I hadn't just sat there and explained it to them.
It is. I mean, ultimately, it's one of the most beautiful. It's a really beautiful idea. It seems like the holy grail of ideas. When we just for context, we all had a conversation earlier on, and one of the things that I found really warming was the fact that potentially traditional broadcasters suddenly give us a home for those who take part in esports, those who enjoy it, to have the same coverage and same enjoyment from it as you would watching a football, rugby, or cricket tournament, as we did when we were growing up, that got us into that sport. And it's, I think that it is the holy grail. Obviously, there's a lot of discussions, a lot of ways of how that's got to be produced, and I guess that leads very nicely into that discussion we've got to really have, which is, esports isn't just a shooting game. There must be, there are a huge amount of different games that are suitable to be turned into an esport. Remove the plural. Nigel, what you've mentioned the age difficulties, but tell us a little bit about the considerations you take on what makes a good game for a production to be put into OTT or linear television.
Well, I think one of the main things is just how exciting it is to whoever the audience is, whether you know a lot about it or you don't know a lot about it. And, if you look at things like League of Legends and games like that, they're very, very high standard, very exciting, a lot going on. So even if you don't know what exactly is going on, you're going to be entranced by it. I think for broadcasters and the BBC in particular, what we're looking at elite level sports is what we're interested in, but we're also looking at grassroots, and we're also looking at things that resonate with our core audience, which would be, say, British leagues, which is why we did UKLC, and we found that very, very rewarding. So I think that those are the main things, but that there are just it's the tier 1 esports that I think are really of interest to broadcasters.
Nicholas, Ryan, did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an interesting talk, right? And I think ultimately we're trying to solve for something potentially that only time can solve, right? Because I think look at where we've reached to now, just as a point in time, which definitely wasn't the landscape a couple of years ago. So I think one thing comes with people being able to and wanting to take these risks of putting esports on. And I think to Nigel's point, the tier one space is of course what makes the most sense, right? And I think Ryan had a good mindset around then cherry pick the things that are the relevant bits to show when it's relevant to show. And I think that's going to be a key part. I think I see our journey a bit very much like UFC's journey, right? Having gone from something that was deemed extremely violent, never to be shown on TV, banned in majority of states in the US, until they kind of tweaked and finessed it into what it is today, where they managed to elevate the things that are truly technical and exciting, et cetera, et cetera. And I think back to the point around Counter-Strike being probably the best example of a game that in its core will look violent when you see it. But if you were to ask the people watching it, no one would say, yeah, I'm tuning in to see all these headshots happening, live on the broadcast. That's never going to be the answer. It'll always be to see someone competing at the highest level. And I think that just means that this is something time will solve, and it will require people like Nigel, BBC, to take the risk of putting it on. But I mean, ultimately, to Nigel's point, the 16 to 34-year-old, they will tell you what they want to see, and if you don't have it, they'll go somewhere else.
I guess I, for risk of being flamed here, and I'm using my words carefully, but at the end of the day, is it a case that an audience in broadcast may understand, watching a game where you go pow pow, person dies, and you get a point for it, versus maybe some of the other games out there? You know what, Ryan, you've got a huge amount of exposure to this. There's that, and obviously the considerations about potentially different sports being treated differently with different audiences. Again, without putting too fine a point on it, we all know in the UK when Grand Theft Auto came on the scene, there was actually absolute uproar, but it's now a staple of our living rooms in many cases. So I mean, maybe you could just touch on maybe the different variations of of games that you think that could be suitable for broadcast.
Yeah, and I think it's generational, and time is such a big factor in that. Like you said, when Grand Theft Auto first came out, the only news you heard about it is how controversial it was, and yeah, now it's just in our vocabulary, and it's different for different regions. Different regions will have different appetites. Just kind of, I think, as the crew was mentioning before, you may have a game that's global and played on every continent, but you need more of a local hook there. I don't really watch League of Legends, but when I got involved in it, it was because of the storytelling, right? There was the whole Faker story, and it felt like a LeBron type story. So that got me to watch, even though I don't play the game. And I think, as Nigel was saying before, it's less important that I knew all of the spells, but those cameras that were imposed on there were hyper important, because I was actually watching for the players and the stories a little more than the sport. But as far as the games, whether you're playing an ultraviolet game or the top down game that see all the details of violence, I think it's going to come down to the broadcaster of what their appetite is. And as time goes on, I think there will be more appetite for it. A huge game with tons of players playing it and properly regulated is going to be a little more acceptable than something newer and that's less familiar to your Grand Theft Auto reference.
I just want to make everyone aware who's watching this. Obviously, we're coming up to nearly the halfway stage of this riveting interview. I do hope you're all enjoying yourself. You've got a bottle of wine or a beer in hand. I haven't. It's really important to call out. If you do have any questions, please keep submitting them. I do need to make a reference, Nigel. Obviously, as you are hidden behind your silhouette on the screen, it has been commented on that you have the smooth voice of a late night radio program host. So I don't know if you want to reconsider your career options in the future, but Graham Norton, eat your heart out. You've definitely got it there. So as I say, keep your questions coming in. If you've got something that you actually want me to put to this panel, please do submit it. Otherwise, I'll just carry on providing them your compliments. I am watching your comments as they come in. So let's just move on very slightly. the funding model for esports production has obviously always been sponsorship led. The only way of producing the big tournaments and the only reason organizations have been able to put these shows on has come down to the commercial rights within sponsorship. That sometimes, I guess, could be a barrier to entry. I'll start with Nigel, and then I'm going to come to you, Nicholas, and then yourself, Ryan. Sorry, I'm going round in circles there. But Nigel, tell me a little bit. I mean, the BBC especially, you're the flag carrier for us over here. Tell us a little bit about the considerations you have to make and maybe what governs whether or not you can or can't do a deal with a production company.
Yeah, we have very stringent editorial guidelines about particularly advertising and impartiality and undue prominence, and that can cause issues, and it is dependent on the esports rights holder having contracts with their sponsors which are fluid enough, in the same way that more traditional sports have those contracts as well. But it causes a problem. You're right. If it's very stringent on their side, and there's nothing they can do. But there's a lot of work that we can do ourselves. There's camera angles. There's cutting in and out of streams. So we found that many of the esports organizations we've worked with have been, just super helpful, super professional, and just very accommodating to get the best result for everybody. And, the overall exposure benefits everybody, including the sponsor, indirectly.
Nicholas?
Yep. Hopefully we're part of that group that he's talking about.
I was just going to say, he's a great advert there for you.
Yeah, let's hope. But no, I think it's spot on, right? I think we're dealing in you said the Wild West. It's hopefully less Wild Westy now, but it's on us, the tournament organizers, to make sure that this is smooth for anyone working with it, right? And that's both the commercial partners coming in who want to get their name on various bits and pieces throughout the show, but then especially when also, broadcast sales is a hugely important part of our financial ecosystem around our tournaments. And I think working with the different takers to find solution that works, I think with Nigel and the BBC was a good example of us implementing analog and extra feed in order for them to be able to get something cropped out so that they were happy. And I think that's very much an analog fix, but that also comes down to more digital or traditional fixes, like having the right types of feeds that the broadcasters are used to taking, right? Clean, dirty, mixed, whatever is kind of needed. We have to deliver to that degree now. And that is definitely something I think we've seen a shift in where I think it's becoming more and more the norm to produce and deliver like traditional sport events, and we're also seeing it being expected. And then I think an interesting thing here as well is also the fact that our rights holders are not, our different takers are not necessarily all of the scale of the BBC. It's all the way down to smaller productions only operating on Twitch and YouTube, all the way down to actually single streamers who are entertaining their own fan base and doing it just like they were a taker themselves. So I think it's an interesting landscape when you look at how many we have to try to sort of cater to and not alienate anyone or deliver something that isn't up to par with what they're expecting.
Yeah, and there are so many different kind of mini kind of masters to serve here, because there's the teams that are trying to figure out their business models. There's the league, there's the publisher, there's the tournament organizer, and there's a lot of different there's a lot of conflict there, because everyone's got sponsorship's such a big part of esports that almost every one of those groups is trying to sell. Like even the people buying the media rights, they're selling advertising. The team shows up like it's a NASCAR event. The tournament organizer sells even more within the broadcast, whether it's baked in or on the set. So it is such a big part, and it causes a big conflict. And I think that's why you see a lot of often when the publisher tries to bring more of that in, it's because they recognize that sponsorship is such a big part, and because there aren't a ton of revenue streams for esports right now, and it is an industry that is on its way, but still very much figuring out what its business model is.
There's been one of the questions that's come in actually kind of, I think, almost leads in with this discussion, because again, it's that adage, isn't it, that broadcast is more constrictive. That maybe it should leave esports alone. The question that's been put is, wouldn't putting esport on traditional TV dissolve the authenticity of the experience because of some of the adult / traditional / boomer standards it have to comply with? I get where that question's going, and I understand why it's come in. Earlier on, we talked about the idea when we were discussing before the show. We talked about the idea that broadcast is the grandfather. Does it have a relevance here? But I mean, Nicholas, I see your head shaking as much as mine would. In a nutshell, why not?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, right? I just think we have to stop comparing the two because they solve for two different things, right? Ryan put it very beautifully in that it's the thing that we can all point to our elders, to others that we want to understand it, and that living on a place that they know, that they feel comfortable in navigating, that'll help people our age. It'll help younger people trying to get their parents to understand what is it they're spending time on in their rooms, right? And I think that's one side of it. I think the other, when it comes to what is then put on the broadcast, I think that is where you should definitely see it as two separate things, right? I think an approach we've always tried to take is make the product that goes on Twitch and YouTube very core, because that's where the most core audience lives, but then try to entice the various broadcasters out in the world to try to do something a bit more light, a bit more welcoming, where you maybe over explain bits and pieces. And I think we've actually seen people shift over to other types of more traditional broadcasts because they had a lighter touch to broadcasting the show. And I think it's two different things, and they both have value and serve in some degree the same audience, but helping it getting legitimized, I guess, back to my earlier point.
And Nigel, again, it goes back to that conversation earlier on. At the end of the day, it's not like this hasn't been done elsewhere before. In a world where at the moment the attention spans are less, the idea that cricket, for instance, was too complex, so and it went on for too long. Out came the 2020. I guess that's that. How do you see that evolution? Do you feel that maybe it will be the broadcasters potentially creating a subgenre, taking as is traditional, creating your own show in parallel to a competition, or do you feel that you will continue to utilize the product provided to you, such as Blast?
I think it is interesting because it's going against what a lot of our research is telling us, that younger people have shorter attention spans, or would not just that they have shorter attention spans, but that they want things to be shorter. So it seems very counterintuitive. I think the point we made about the certainties being vital, that can only help start times, end times. But I think the best thing would be to start a new competition would be the best thing. So there could be the Twitch events, there could be YouTube events, and then there could be a new cup or competition specifically for broadcasters. I think that would be the best thing and would be best for the audience, and wouldn't be taking away from the current audience, which would potentially end badly for the broadcaster in terms of social media interaction and things like that.
So in other words, it almost, in some respects, it's, to some people they'll see it as a feeder, others they'll see it as an established series, but it maintains that authenticity, the grassroots. It protects their interests across the board, is what you're saying, I assume.
Yep, definitely. And the great thing is that because it would start from fresh, it would mean that all the parties could get together and say, right, this works best for us, or how about we try this, or it could even be experimental. But I think that there would definitely be a view towards that hybrid audience I was talking about, with uncles, aunts, parents, children. And then it would also be really important to get the timings right for that particular region. I think this is part of the problem, is that what's good for maybe North America or certain parts of Europe is not good for certain countries in particular. And so you're missing bedtimes, you're missing, you're crossing meal times, and that's going to affect your audiences, traditional audiences.
Nicholas, Ryan, do you want to jump in on that as well?
Yeah, and even to your original comment, there seems to be, and maybe this is less true than the perception, but there seems to be this fear of alienating the core audiences. But I don't think we can be afraid of that. And esports has always been about experimentation, so we can't be afraid of that. And we have so many different options to ensure that we don't alienate those audiences. It's almost kind of comical that we refer to going on television as linear, because even television isn't so linear anymore. When during the regular season of the NFL, we watch Red Zone more because you're probably playing in fantasy and you're watching, your second or third stream. But then playoff comes, and then we'll watch the linear version again. So I think there's a lot that can be done, and it's not just the one size fits all. We have to change the broadcast and make it dumb it down for anyone. There's lots of ways to approach this.
I think you may have just touched on something actually there. I've spent a fair bit of time talking about, whether it's right for broadcasters are broadcasting this content and whether we should be scoping our content around the broadcasters. But the other side of it is, do you think that actually if this is adopted more by broadcasters, that actually we're going to start influencing the way games are designed and actually from the outset starting to cultivate that culture within the ecosystem from the start point? We've talked about the different games, the reason why CS:GO is so successful, but are we going to start seeing an impact where games are actually designed for tournaments that will ultimately end up being broadcast?
I do think that we already see the ones that are the most successful have some kind of core and internal teams, and they've obviously developed and focused on esports. And I think getting in early, because there will be new esports. Some of the bigger esports only came out a few years ago. There will be another one next year and another one the next year. And last year I think it was 2 of the top 5 most viewed esports were mobile games, and we probably wouldn't even know that unless you found the chart. And they were in different regions and different user base and just a different viewing experience. But mobile, just like Nigel was saying, is no one wants to sit on a mobile screen for 45 minutes. So they inherently have some of that esports kind of DNA within them. And so I think if the publisher, the developer acknowledges that, embraces that, and has that as core features of launch, if that's part of their strategy, and yeah, it should be, in my opinion, they're only going to have a more successful game and a more successful esport.
A question's come in. I actually really like it. I'm not sure what the answer will be from you guys, but it leaves me feeling warm and fuzzy. I was going to say, do more traditional games such as like Smash Brothers or Mario Kart, staple names in the family-friendly household. The games of our generation, I guess, at some point were brought up on, Donkey Kong. Can you see that high potential on broadcast if there was a way of them being multiplayer? That's to anyone who fancies asking it. I just felt I had to say it.
I can see Ryan nodding as well.
Oh yeah, even without, we see them today. One of my favorite things to watch. There's so much nostalgia there, right? Put Mario in front of somebody, they're going to watch. Like, oh, I used to play that. But there's speed running and the game's done quick stuff. It's some of the most viewed content on the internet annually, and it's all for charity. And it's just kind of win across the spectrum. It is, but it is a single player game. But they're speed run. You can make an esport out of anything. There's competitive cooking.
Yeah, and I think another good example is if you look at chess, right? Something even older and even more on the side, right? There's a great concept called PogChamps that takes place. I think it's chess.com that leads that up, which has influencers, streamers, gamers playing chess versus each other, right? If you were to be told that that's going to be huge and attract a lot of eyeballs some years ago, you probably think you were crazy, but that is the world we're living in. And to Ryan's point, I think he's right. Anything can be elevated. Any game could become relevant. It's just about when, how, and why.
It reminds me that about 4 years ago, I was invited and we did the filming of the Rubik's Cube World Championships.
There you go.
And I must say, I went there with a pretty closed mind, but actually the journey, the actual period I spent with the people who competed, the thousands of them, it was probably one of the most humbling experiences. An incredibly dedicated, fascinating group of individuals who, quite frankly, if they can solve a Rubik's Cube, I think it was Felix Zemdegs did it in something like 3.7 seconds whilst we were there and set a new record. And again, it's this idea that, that, as you said, anything can become a sport, anything can become an esport. If you can find a way of allowing it to be competitive, then you can do so. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to carry on with the questions I do. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
No, I think it was actually a tie-in to what Ryan said earlier, and I think a bit what Nigel touched on as well about that. I think it's narrative that's going to drive all of it, right? If you have the right narrative for something, it's going to be successful, right? And I think Ryan's analogy around the LeBron and Faker, I think it's a great example. We can set anybody down in front of a screen and watch esports, but it's the narrative that is going to make you a fan and get you excited. So I think that's where a lot of it's going to come from.
It's cultivating the story behind it. One for you, Nigel. Don't want you to feel left out here. I say that because the questions just disappeared off my screen. Talk about being really well prepared. It was a really good question, and I am going to find it again. Otherwise, I'm just going to make it up and pretend that I did see it. With more major networks building their own streaming services, do you anticipate them adding more live esports? And to top that off, is there a reason that esports, certainly with the BBC at the moment, that it hasn't yet found itself onto the major channels and it does sit within your OTT on-demand platform, such as iPlayer?
I think the good thing about being on the iPlayer and on our bbc.co.uk website is makes it available to a wider range of people who might not necessarily be watching a TV. So it means you can watch it on the go. So that's one of the main advantages of having it simulcast there. I think, yep, the streaming services will look at it, but it depends on which type of service they are. For example, Netflix is just not going to look at esports other than documentaries because it doesn't have any reuse value. I think other places are going to have to look at it, particularly if there's going to be any new into the sports ecosystem. They're going to have to look at esports as a way of differentiating themselves. But it's exciting, and it just depends on the esports that they go after and the type of they're going for as a service.
I see them actually do this because you lose a lot of those restrictions that make linear not sexy, right? We've got to end on the hour, or we've got all of these regulations and things that make whether a game or a format less appetizing. So that is super interesting. That being said, there's a lot of streaming services already, and there's obviously a lot of competition out there. So as these companies kind of develop, them experimenting with simply acquiring content and putting it on their platform may not be as simple as your traditional programming. I think even major sports have not figured out streaming live yet, right? I'm very surprised actually that most people aren't watching streaming yet, and I think that's a part of that is the technology.
It's that, and I guess also, whereas esports has developed within a modern infrastructure and a modern ecosystem, more traditional sports developed long before this came into play, and we always have that age-old adage about the media rights with the Premier League and such like, and the fact that in many cases people have seen it as a barrier to entry as opposed to actually making it available to all. Nigel, I found that question I was looking for, and I would like to ask it. I believe the person is called Jay, because I can just see it out the squinting of my eye. For Nigel, what were the main takeaways internally from your broadcast of the UKLC?
I think that the main things that we took away was that the very passionate fan base and incredibly skilled pool of talent. I think what was really interesting for us was just seeing these orgs which had come together and were getting stronger and stronger, and we're just really strong on social media and promoting themselves and promoting the sport. And I think it was just a really it was great fun working with ESL on this DreamHack as was, and it's just a very professional grassroots and just something that I think the BBC should be doing as much as possible. And it was really interesting to see how when we did the second season it was getting better, and the promotion and the relegation aspects were very interesting for me personally, because you don't often see that in the other esports, particularly these other ones that Ryan was talking about, the Overwatchers and other organizations. So it was it was very good. And then you also had the aspect of there was the aspect of Munster gaming in Ireland. So there were many different things that really resonated for the BBC in particular, and I think were very good examples of what can be done in esports.
No, I totally agree. I am terribly sorry to inform you all that the voices in my ear are telling me that since we've been talking so much about finishing promptly, that I also have to do the same. So I'm gonna dump my quick fire quiz round I had planned. You'll notice I'd left little notes under your chairs with a little question, but you know we'll do away with that. And Ryan, I'm joking. There isn't really a note under your chair. I don't even know where you live, gents. You know. This has been an incredible conversation because honestly, it opens up so many avenues and options and considerations, especially for those who are just entering this area at the moment. And what a time to be doing it. You know, as we say, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Certainly, there's a sense of that with COVID at the moment. I really do want to thank you for actually putting your heart and soul into this conversation, because you have been really open with us, and I think hopefully the way we've explored this has been interesting to our viewers. So I really guess what it's left for me to do is to say thank you so much, Nicholas Eastrup from Blast. Thank you for joining us. Nigel Crowe, Sports Rights Executive from BBC Sport. Thank you. Ryan Thompson, CPO and co-founder of Esports Engine, happens to be on the other side of the pond, so he's got a few more hours of daylight left in front of him. Thank you. For those on this sort of standard time, I'm going to go and get a beer. I hope you can as well. And I wish you all a really pleasant and safe onward journey as we come to the end of COVID. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. God bless. Take care.